Good evening, everyone. When I began to reflect on what I'm going to say tonight here, I realized that suffering is one of the most difficult subjects to understand. As a matter of fact, this is one of the subjects that makes many people question existence of God and relevance of religion. If you talk with people, they say, if God is merciful, if God is loving, if God is kind, why then He allows so much suffering in this world? And also they say, how could you believe in a religion that believes in hell and punishment and all kind of really awful things that religious leaders have done in the world and believers do in the name of religion and in the name of God. And usually people don't have much answer, really convincing answer to this kind of statement. So I thought that is a good idea to reflect to see what is the Baha'i perspective on suffering. And in order to do that, I went to look at some of the writings of the Baha'i faith. And I found one that was really puzzling. Okay. And the one is in one of the books of Baha'u'llah called The Hidden Words. Hidden Words is a very small book. It has two parts. One part that was in the original language in Persian and the other one in Arabic. And it has a number of very small statements. And the reason that it is called the Hidden Books, Hidden Words, is because in the story of Islam, in the history of Islam, there is a very prominent woman figure, Fatima. Fatima was mother of Imam Hossain, and Imam Hossain is considered as the most prominent, the most outstanding, the most mysterious martyr in Islam. And when he was martyred, Fatima was in a state of grief. And these words, these hidden words, were recited to her spirit and brought her joy. And because nobody knew what they were called hidden. Baha'u'llah says these are those words that were revealed, given to Fatima to decrease her suffering. Okay. Also, Baha'u'llah says that this small book, The Hidden Words, is the essence of all the spiritual teachings of all religions until the Baha'i faith. That's the essence of it. So, when you read the hidden words, you come across these very powerful and pregnant, if you wish, statements. And here the one that I'm going to read for you is directly about the issue of suffering. He says, O Son of Man. And when you read the hidden words, you will see many of them starts, O Son of Man. O Son of Man means, O humanity, all humanity. Man, woman, everybody. It's just reference to us. We have been created and we have a history, and here we are. O Son of Man, my calamity, God's calamity, my calamity, is my providence. Outwardly it is fire and vengeance, but inwardly it is light and mercy. Hasten thereunto, that thou mayest become an eternal light and an immortal spirit. This is my command unto thee. Do thou observe it. In the original Arabic is a very interesting because it says, Bala'i enayati. Okay. Bala is calamity. Enayat is providence. Providence means God's care, love, and guidance. That's what it means. So here Baha'u'llah says, God's calamity is expression of His mercy and His care and His love. Okay? And he says, outwardly it is vengeance. Vengeance means punishment. Punishment and retaliation and pain. Okay? Outwardly looks at as a punishment. But inwardly it is light and mercy. And then he says something very, very mysterious. He says, hasten thereunto, meaning don't run away from the calamities of life. Don't run away. Don't get drunk. Don't busy yourself with other things so that you wouldn't feel the pain of life. Face it. Go towards it. And if you do, then you become an eternal light. Now, isn't that interesting? For us, becoming eternal light and immortal spirit. Now, this is a very difficult issue, how we are going to understand this concept, How do we become eternal light and immortal spirit through suffering? And how should we approach to suffering? What should be our approach to suffering? How should we hasten towards suffering? Okay. So these are the reflections that I began to have about this. And I feel that in order for us to understand it, one of the first things that we should do is to think about human reality. Human reality, our reality, is the most complex expression of the law of unity that we know about. It is unity of body and soul, of mind and matter, of physical and spiritual, is a unity of the physical and the spiritual, or mind and matter. And when this unity takes place at the moment of conception onwards, then our reality, our selfhood is created. We become a self, become a person. Okay? We have an identity now. And when this unity breaks up, in other words, when the soul leaves the body, then the soul goes this way and the body goes this way. And no longer we have that expression of beingness in this life. So we embark on another journey. Okay? So we have to, in order to understand the impact of suffering on human mind and human reality, we have to understand the issue of what really is human reality. Okay? And in the human reality, this is the combination of the two. And they are never separated from each other. In other words, you cannot separate mind from body, and many people tend to have a dichotomous perspective of life. Dichotomous perspective means that people think that we have two realities. One is a physical reality and one is a spiritual reality. And they say, well, I'm going to forget about physical and focus on the spiritual. You can't. Because unity means the two together. The physical and the spiritual are together. As long as we are in this life and we are alive, the body and the soul, the mind and the body, the physical and the spiritual are together. They cannot be separated. And this is very, very important to remember. Okay. Okay. So, when human suffering happens, therefore, it affects both the spiritual and the physical dimensions of our being. Now, when we reflect on this suffering, and we want to understand how it affects the different aspects of our life, for the sake of making issues a little bit more clear, we have to see what are different expressions or different aspects of human reality. And in doing so, we can identify at least 4 aspects of our being. One is our physical. The other one is psychological, our emotions and thoughts. The other one is social, our relationships. And the other one is spiritual, moral, ethical, spiritual issues. And in this area, every category has its own unique types of suffering. Okay? Every unique types of suffering. For example, physical, which relates to our body. Okay? One of the most important physical suffering that we all experience is pain. Right? Pain afflicts everybody. And pain is more powerful than most powerful. Okay? Doesn't matter how powerful you are going to be defeated by pain. Okay. Now, somebody can say, well, why we have pain? Well, pain is one of the greatest gifts that we have. Because pain is, first of all, is a signal that something is wrong. If you didn't have that signal, you don't do anything. When you have pain, immediately the question is, what is wrong? You know, one of the most serious diseases in a symbolic terms is leprosy. That's the reason that in religions, you know, for example, in Christianity, they say that Christ, you know, healed the leper. Okay? What is leprosy? What is the manifestation of leprosy? Manifestation of leprosy is that the person doesn't feel pain. And because the person doesn't feel pain, then they touch everything, they burn themselves, they cut themselves, they become deformed through the process of not having pain. You see? Pain, therefore, people who don't experience pain, psychological pain, moral pain, they are spiritual lepers. These are, in psychological terms, they are psychopaths. They say psychopath person is a person who doesn't feel suffering of other people. Okay? And because he doesn't feel suffering of other people, he inflicts suffering on people. Okay? It inflicts suffering, makes people to suffer. Most of the really awful murderers in human history, you will see that their personality makeup is that they don't have sensitivity to suffering and to pain of people. So, in a physical sense, one of the sufferings that all of us experience is pain. But pain is really important, because when we have pain, we know something is wrong. When we know something wrong, we will try to find out what is it and what to do about it. We develop medicine, we develop art of healing, we develop hospitals, we do all of the things that we do is because we feel pain. If we didn't feel pain, we all happily die without discovering anything. Okay? That would be it. We have big smiles on our faces, and then meanwhile we have pneumonia, or we have appendicitis, or we have broken legs, or whatever it is, and we are dying, but we are smiling stupidly. Okay? You know, that's what happens. But because we experience pain, because God has given the gift of pain, we then use our capacity to know and knowledge and discovery and science and everything, and we develop then the whole things that we do. You see. And another one is, for example, weakness is another suffering that comes upon human body. The older we become, the weaker we become. What is weakness? Weakness is a sign of journey of life. We travel to, when you're traveling, after a while you get weak, But traveling is really fantastic, because when you go on a journey, you learn so much that otherwise you wouldn't. You see, otherwise you wouldn't. And of course there are other physical sufferings. Deformity is one of them. Okay, disadvantaged in a physical term and so forth. Now, psychological suffering, again, there is a wisdom in psychological suffering. What are some of the most important emotional, for example, areas that people suffer from? Well, one is fear. Another one is anger. Another one is sadness and depression. Anxiety, shame, rejection. These are all psychological, emotional areas of suffering, okay? And they also have a purpose in life, okay? If you I give you one example, so you see how it is. The most fundamental emotional experience in human being is love. Okay? Both the capacity to love and also to receive love. Okay? Love is central to human experience and to being human. If a person doesn't love, that person is not a full, complete human. Okay? Now, whenever there is a deficiency in our love relationships, we experience sadness, we experience rejection, we experience fear, we experience anger, resentment, all of those things. Whenever we are in good state of love relationship, we experience joy, we experience certitude, we have courage, we can do anything, we can take over the world because we are loved, you see. So, most human emotions are indicators of our state of love, of how we are loving, and whether what we are loving is something that we should love. You know, not everything is worthy of love. For example, people who love war. Just imagine, you know. Imagine if you were a person who loved war, or loved violence, or loved injustice, or, you know, that kind of thing. So not everything is worthy of human love. The object of your love determines the nature of your love, the quality of your love. We will come back to this issue later. But in the social respect, suffering, we have enormous amount of suffering socially also. And they all revolve around the issue of relationships. Social suffering are connected to relationships. Such as, you know, just think of things that happens with respect to relationships, aside from issue of love that we talked already. Injustice, for example. Right? So many of humanity are suffering from injustice. Injustice is an expression of faulty human relationships or poverty. The way that the extremes of wealth and poverty are created in the world, and masses of humanity suffer as a result. Or prejudice. Just think of prejudice and how much suffering it brings to humanity. The minorities of the world. Women throughout history, the minorities throughout history. Just think. Think what has happened to the First Nations. Think what has happened to the Africans. Think of the suffering of religious minorities around the world. Just think about it. And of course, lack of freedom. And I come back to the issue of freedom later. And of course, violence. Think of all people around the world who are victims of violence of all kinds. Violence in the family, violence in the society, violence in the schools, bullying, violence in the form of war. Just think of it. It's everywhere. These are all areas of human suffering. And when it comes to spiritual suffering, it refers to the dynamics of a spiritual transformation. Okay, and I think some of the most fundamental aspects of suffering in a spiritual sense are with respect to the whole issue of mortality and immortality. See, when people believe that this life is transient and at the end we become nothing, this is the greatest spiritual suffering. Because if life ends and it ends into nothingness, then what's the purpose of it? What's the purpose of living in this life? This life is full of suffering anyway. And then at the end, there's nothing. That's a real bummer, okay? This is not good, this is not fair, okay? Abdu'l-Baha says, the cause of all calamities is fear of annihilation, fear of becoming nothing, annihilation, fear of becoming nothing. This is the cause of all calamities. In other words, when a person decides that this life is transient and ends into nothingness, then anything goes. Anything goes. You can't do anything because then there is no reason really not to. Okay? So these are the categories of suffering that we all experience. And as I talk, we all realize that we have gone through this. Okay? Now, we have to ask ourselves, what are the roots of suffering? Where suffering comes from. Okay? And we can identify at least 3 categories of suffering. Self-induced suffering, suffering that we bring about on ourselves. Others-induced suffering, suffering that other people bring to us or we bring to other people. Okay? And then unintended, accidental suffering, like natural events, earthquakes, and those kind of things. Okay? So there are 3 categories of suffering. Now, self-induced suffering, all of us are familiar with it. In a physical sense, we can bring suffering upon ourselves if we don't take care of our physical body. In a psychological sense, we bring suffering to ourselves by being greedy, by being envious, by having hatred, by having violence and conflict, by lying, by rejecting people. These are all areas of psychological suffering that we cause, and ourselves, because we do it to ourselves. When we reject somebody, not only that person suffers, we also suffer. It's impossible to avoid that. And then, in human relationships, we can also experience suffering in the area of backbiting, for example, or lying or dishonesty. When I was practicing psychiatry, I observed that majority of marital problems that people had was because of lying and dishonesty. Couples were not honest with each other. They were lying with each other. They would say I love you, and they didn't mean it. There were areas that, and of course in many marriages, there is conflict, there is violence, there is inequality, there are all aspects of it. And also, in a spiritual sense, if we live aimless lives, if we live a life that is self-centered, if we are selfish, if we have an unproductive life, then we create enormous degree of suffering for ourselves, because there is nothing more really problematic if I realize that I have lived my life in a fruitless, meaningless way, and have therefore totally wasted it. Waste of life. And there are so many lives that in this world are wasted. So many lives are wasted. Others induce suffering that other people do to us, are a number of kinds. For example, violence, of course, at the top of it. Rejection, backbiting again, calumny. Calumny means defamation of other people. These are all people tell lies about you. People accuse you of things that are not true. People say things about you that are mean and unkind. People can take away your freedom. People can be prejudiced towards you, can make fun of you. All kind of things that we experience in life. These are all their suffering that happen to us from other people doing what they do to us. And of course, the third category of suffering is not in our control. When accidents in life happens, disease comes, earthquake comes, somebody hits you by car, all kind of things that happens. So all of these sufferings, all of these are there, and you cannot avoid it. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the most causes of suffering that we must avoid at all costs. Because there's so many suffering in this world, and so much of it is not in our control. The only thing that is in our control is what we do. Right? Now, I try to search an answer for this, to see whether I can find something in the Baha'i writings about what is it that we absolutely should avoid. Okay? Not causing suffering to other people and not causing suffering to ourselves. Okay? And I came across this statement of Baha'u'llah in his most holy book. Is the most holy book of the Baha'i faith. Okay. In this book, Baha'u'llah says, "Ye have been forbidden to commit murder or adultery or to engage in backbiting or calumny." Calumny means defaming people. Now, why these four things have been put together? Just think about it. Backbiting is one of them. Murder is another thing. That's a huge distance, you know. Backbiting, many times we sit around and say, "Have you heard? You know, so and so, you know, I didn't like the shape of, you know, the color of his hair or her hair or something like that." Or worse, we say, you know, it's nice to sit and talk about other people, you know, and backbite. You know, our newspapers have columns, you know, for backbiting, you know. You know, the televisions and news and so forth are all filled with backbiting. You know, it is one of the pastimes of our time. We sit around and watch and laugh at suffering of other people and the fact that they make fool of themselves and so forth. And here is Baha'u'llah saying that four things are forbidden. Okay? Murder, adultery, backbiting, calumny. Why? Murder means killing another human being. Adultery means killing a marriage. Backbiting means backstabbing someone. It's an act of killing. And calumny means character assassination. All of them are acts of destruction. Destruction of another human being, either physically or destruction of their institution of marriage or destruction of their or understanding of their personality. When we backbite, we are destroying the good impression that we have of the other person. Or when defaming people, your character assassination. They are all acts of fundamental destruction. And Baha'u'llah says, this is forbidden. Because these conditions create the greatest suffering to people. Just imagine, just reflect on the times that you have suffered the most. Thank God we haven't been murdered, okay? But other areas may have affected us, okay?
Okay, then I feel pretty good.
Yeah. The other areas may have it. We may have been subject of backbiting. We may have been subject of calumny and defamation. We may have been we may have heard that somebody has been telling unkind things about us or doing unkind things towards us in our behind our back. And you suffer profoundly because of that. That's a profound degree of suffering. Okay. So it's not surprising that we find these statements in the writings of the Baha'i faith about suffering. Then I ask myself a question, okay, how we overcome suffering? What are we going to do, Because suffering is there. Baha'u'llah says, hasten towards calamity. Don't run away from it. Because if you go towards it and you understand it, and if you develop a greater degree of wisdom about suffering, then you are on your path to eternal life, to become eternal spirit, to become eternal light, meaning the other realms of existence beyond this realm of existence. So the question is, how do we do it? Okay. So came across a statement of Abdul Baha, which gives very clear directions on how to deal with suffering. Okay. I have divided what Abdul Baha says, categorized it, and there are 3 areas. 1, Abdul Baha says, do not cause suffering to others and to yourself. That's one thing. 2nd, learn from suffering. And 3rd, develop a special quality that is required for suffering, meaning be patient. Okay? In suffering, you need patience. If you are impatient, you're going to suffer more. And I know that because I'm an impatient person. Okay? I know. And I know how much I have paid in life for being impatient. Okay? In one of his tablets, Baha'u'llah says, God loves those who are patient. Okay? So the first category of not causing suffering to ourselves or to other people. That's the most important area. Because this is in our control. We cannot do anything about other people. The only thing that we have control over is ourselves. Okay? And therefore it's not surprising that this short tablet of Abdul Baha, more than 80% of statements that he made was about what we should do. And you all are familiar with it, but I just read it for our own. The first thing he says, be no cause of grief to anyone. Very simple. Okay. Be kind to all people. And love them with pure spirit. Okay. Be as kind as ever you can be. Be silent concerning the faults of other people. Okay? Be silent. Look always at the good and not at the bad. do all our deeds in kindness. He repeats this over and over and over, of how important it is to learn to be kind. Because most people don't know how to be kind. Okay. Cut our hearts from ourselves, meaning not to be selfish. Be humble. Be as one. Be as one soul in many bodies. For the more we love each other, what happens? The more we love each other, the nearer we shall be to God. If we want to be close to God, we have to love each other. Act with courteousness and wisdom. Be truthful, be hospitable, and be reverent, meaning respectful. Be cause of a healing for every sick person. And it goes on, all statements about how we have to become agents of kindness, of love, and of unity. As we do that, we decrease our suffering, and we are not the cause of suffering of other people. Abdul-Baha also says, should calamity exist to the greatest degree, rejoice. For these things are the gifts and favors of God. Now this is important. I was reflecting on it, and I realized that the most important positive decisions that I have made in my life have been after a major calamity. Major calamity. I realized that whenever I did not respond to a calamity with an eye of understanding, didn't try to understand why this calamity has happened, I have lost an opportunity. But whenever a calamity happened and I allowed myself to reflect on it, to see what was my role in it, to understand what was the cause of it, to search for my own hidden capacities to deal with a calamity, I learned more about myself. I was able to change the direction of life, and the outcome was positive. Anytime I didn't do that, the outcome was negative. You see? And that, it has happened over and over and over. With respect to many issues, that I have found the greatest school of learning is when we experience calamity. When we
experience what?
Calamity. When we experience suffering. When we experience suffering, that is the time to learn about ourselves and about life and about dynamics of human life. That is that is where we really go deep into the causes and dynamics of human existence. And therefore is a source of rejoicing. Because, and this would go to the beginning statement that I read about from Baha'u'llah. It says, my calamity is my providence, is God's gift and care to us. Because it is a light that shows the way towards a process that detaches you from the physical, transient aspects of life and focuses you on the most important and lasting and eternal realities of life. This is the whole dynamics of detachment from the world. You know, living in the world, doing the best that you can do in this world, contributing to this world, but at the same time being detached from it. Knowing that we are on a journey of eternity. And therefore, what we do here is the process of learning, ever greater degree of self-knowledge, of understanding of the dynamics of life, of expanding of our consciousness, of our awareness, of becoming universal people. You see, a universal person is the opposite of a prejudiced person. A prejudiced person's universe is very small. He says, this is my world, and all others are outside of it. A universal person, everybody is in his or her world. You see. So this is the process of learning from calamities, learning from suffering, things about ourselves that we never knew that we had, discovering capacities that we didn't have, learning new things that we otherwise wouldn't have done, and becoming sensitive to the suffering of other people. If I become poor, then I will become much more sensitive about poor people in the world. If I'm hungry, then I would learn how other people feel when they are hungry. If I have in my family a child that is afflicted, then I would know how much suffering other people are doing in the world and so forth. So it makes you profoundly sensitive to other people and makes you universal in the process, makes you connected to the whole world rather than separated from the world. It's a process of that helps to spiritualize, if you wish. Okay? And in order to do that, we need patience. Why we need patience? Because this is the process of transformation. And the process of transformation always is a slow process, is a systematic process, is the way that a worm becomes a butterfly. Okay? It's a process that takes place. And you just can't do it like that. You have to be willing to go through the stages of development. And this requires not only discipline of self, but also being patient with the process. Now, when you put all of these two things together, it seems to me that Baha'u'llah is calling us to become saints.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
That's too much.
No, it's not. He calls upon us to become saints. It doesn't mean that we are saints. It means that we are trying to acquire saintly qualities. And it's very interesting. One young person wrote to Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, asking what he should do in this world. And the guardian of the Baha'i faith wrote back to him and said that the world of humanity is in great crisis. And it needs a new generation of the people who are heroes, okay, martyrs, saints,
Oh my.
and administrators.
Oh.
Isn't that interesting?
Administrators.
Isn't that interesting? The world of humanity needs those 4 categories of people.
Martyrs,
Heroes,
heroes,
martyrs, saints, and administrators. Okay? Is a very interesting dynamic, because these are the things that we don't have in this world. Right now, if you think about our world of humanity, can you find a hero?
Batman.
Is there Batman Batman, Superman, Batman,
Wonder Woman.
Wonder Man, those kind of characters become our heroes.
Yeah.
Okay? Is there anybody who is willing to sacrifice himself for the better cause of all humanity? All humanity, not for your cause, for all humanity. Are there any saints in this world? You see, the world has lost its holiness. We don't have the qualities of holiness in this world anymore. And that's why it is so difficult to administer this world. You cannot administer, the election taking place in the United States, and you see what's happening, It's amazing. And that's happening all over the world, because there are you see, the whole world of humanity has risen against their administrators. Right? Governments don't trust their people. People don't trust the government. Workers don't trust the owners of companies, and vice versa. Nobody trusts nobody. It's just one of those conditions that we don't have true leaders for our world of humanity. So these are the conditions that bring about ever greater suffering to the world of humanity. And in order to decrease the suffering of humanity, we as individuals then have to transform. We have to become heroes and martyrs and saints and new type of administrators. Well, I'm too old, it's gone. Younger people, okay? Okay, the younger people. Well, older people, we are finished. But anyway. Yeah.
What about things like the Red Cross, though?
Yeah.
I was watching the Haiti today or last night, and some of these people that go there, they're selfless.
Absolutely.
They're
Absolutely.
like a drop in the haystack. It's very touching to watch them.
It is marvelous to watch them. And if we didn't have these small examples of people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of humanity, this world would be in far worse situation than it is right now. Okay?
Yeah.
We have
Some heroes.
We have heroes, we have martyrs, we have saints.
Yeah.
But they are exceptions rather than the rule.
Yeah.
We all have to go into that path. We all have to understand that in order to decrease the suffering of humanity, we have to go through this spiritual transformation, which would decrease our own suffering and would decrease suffering of humanity. You see, that's what we have to do. And so these were some reflections that I had as I began to think about the whole issue of suffering. And there is one of the hidden words that is very interesting. Baha'u'llah says, O son of being, if thine heart be set upon this eternal, imperishable dominion, and this ancient, everlasting life, forsake this mortal and fleeting sovereignty. Okay? This is the whole issue of detachment and attachment. Okay? That doesn't mean not to be active agent in the arena of life. It means that we have to become more and more universal and less self-centered. That's the process of spiritual transformation and establishing unity and love with all humanity. Anyway, these are some thoughts that I had, and I thought that we can have a little bit of discussion and questions and answers, please.
A question I had is the three categories of suffering that you mentioned, and then trying to connect that to the first hidden word of Baha'u'llah.
That's right.
Then I assume that self-inflicted suffering also puts us in the same category of that suffering that we bring to ourselves is also bounty, in a way. Is that can we also put that in the same category? I mean, there are suffering that brought by the other two categories, which is not in our hand.
Yeah.
But what if individuals bring themselves in suffering, which of course we could learn from? Is that also in the same category of the first hidden word?
If you learn from it, yes. If you learn from it, if you do something to yourself, most of the time when people inflict suffering upon themselves, they usually project it on other people. They say, this person made me to do it. This is the fault of that person. Okay? It's not me that did it, it's the tobacco that did it. Okay? Okay? The tobacco did it. Okay? Okay? It's the devil in me that did it. Always we find somebody else and we put the onus on the other person rather than on ourselves. We always make mistakes in life and bring about suffering upon ourselves. Yeah, of course. The important issue is whether we learn from it or not. Okay. If we learn from it, if we transform, then we are on the right path. Otherwise, we repeat it. Yes.
What about the people that don't have a choice? You talked about the First Nations and you talked about the prejudice. There's so much pain right now in my community. And I'm listening to CBC radio, and I was lucky enough to have a beautiful grandmother who raised us and loved us, and a mother who was a drunk, and a dad who was a drunk, but they loved us, but it was, if it weren't for my grandmothers, I wouldn't be who I was.
That's right.
But there's so much suffering. Like, my cousin is dying right now, and she doesn't want to die.
Mm.
She's so afraid of it. She's got 2 beautiful children. There's lots of anger in my family. The whole family is estranged because everything's coming out in the wash. But, there's like so many people, for instance, get tired of hearing about Aboriginal, Indian, First Nations issues. They say, oh, you guys keep talking about that. But there's more credibility given to people who suffer from other parts. But if it weren't for my grandmother's love, I would be suffering. But
that's right.
And I do the best I can every day, but I can't really be a saint or a martyr or I hated misery. But I just do the best I can with my son, I realize.
Well, that's the characteristic of sainthood.
What's that?
Doing your best.
The best you can.
The
but
best
you can't
you can.
Be overwhelmed. But be overwhelmed by this tidal wave of suffering. Yeah. And that's why I was really interested in coming here.
That's right.
Is because I don't necessarily... I know I've grown with my suffering. Yes. My son died, my husband died.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. My dad died, please custody. I've learned lots. But it's my people that are suffering.
Yes, and somebody wrote Abdul Baha. There's several times people ask Abdul Baha, what about the suffering of innocent people?
Yeah.
Who are subject to tyranny and subject to all kinds of injustice, and they have no power to do anything about it. And Abdul Baha puts this in the equation of life process. He says we should remember that our life is not limited to this life. And God's mercy is present in all worlds of God. And those people who have not had the chance and an opportunity in this world, they would be recompensed by God and would be subject to the mercy of God in the next life. Mm-hmm. And they would continue to do that. He gave an example. Somebody's child had a serious disease and had died. And this woman wrote Abdul Baha and said, what kind of a justice is this? This my child didn't have an opportunity to live. He said, relationship of this world to the next world is like having a small garden and a big garden side by side with a wall between them. So the plants that are in the little garden are not, and people who live in the little garden are not are aware of the big garden. Now, if a plant is growing in this garden and the circumstances are not good for this plant to grow, the earth is not good, there is not enough water, there is not enough room, there are other plants that the roots are coming and don't allow this little plant to grow, then the gardener picks up this little plant and takes it over the wall and puts it in the bigger garden to grow. So to the person who lives this side, he said, this gardener is very unjust and very unkind because didn't let this little plant to grow here. Okay. While in reality, it was the very act of kindness and justice and compassion that the gardener said, enough suffering here, let's go there. And I was reflecting on this when the tsunami happened in Japan and in Haiti. And before that in other countries. And I said, my God, millions of people have been afflicted like this and they just die and go without any fault on their, with no fault of their own. And and if indeed the big garden wasn't there, these people were suffering, their lives would have been suffering, didn't matter whether they lived 10 days or 10 years or 100 years, the life of majority of these people is suffering. And God says, okay, enough suffering for you here. I would do that. Now this is difficult to understand because Abdul Baha said, we don't have any knowledge of the next world. We just can imagine it. But whatever imagine is our imagination. He said, in the same way that when we were in the womb, didn't have any idea of this world, but this world existed. Okay?
Yeah.
In the same way, we don't have any idea of the world after here, but the world after here exists. But we don't have an understanding of it. So these are the mysteries of suffering. These are mysteries of this life. And I think the suffering of the First Nations, for example, hopefully, is awakening the consciousness of humanity, the consciousness of people, the conscience of people in this country, so that we do not allow this kind of a thing to happen again. You see, this is a process of learning, because after all, the whole life is the process of learning and maturation and growth and development and ever-expanding consciousness and becoming spiritual. This is the whole process, you know. So I know it's a very difficult subject. It is not easy.
Like we could probably go on for days talking about this.
Yes.
The spin-offs.
Yes.
The different kinds of
We
suffering.
can. Yeah. Hossain is suffering. Yes.